This is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp. Let's pause and take a moment to talk about something very important. Life has its pressures for everyone, and we often carry the immense weight of expectation to never show weakness, to hide our true feelings, and believe that asking for support somehow makes us less of a person. But bottling things up isn't the answer. It can often lead to feeling down, burnout, or other unhealthy habits. We want to normalize the idea that it's okay to struggle. Real strength actually comes from opening up about what you are carrying and doing something about it so that you can be at your best for yourself and everyone in your life. If you're feeling the weight of the world, or even if things just feel a bit off, I can't stress enough the value of talking to someone. It could be a friend, a loved one, or a therapist. We here at This Week Explained believe that therapy can be incredibly valuable. Whether you've been in therapy personally or not, the broader benefits are clear. It's so helpful for learning positive coping skills, understanding how to set healthy boundaries, and it really empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's so important to remember that therapy isn't just for those who've experienced combat or major trauma. It's a tool for anyone looking to improve their mental well-being and navigate life's challenges. That's why we're thrilled to talk about BetterHelp. With over 5,000 therapists in the UK, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. And it clearly resonates with users, boasting an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars based on over 1.7 million client reviews. It's also incredibly convenient. You can connect with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy schedule. And you can even switch therapists at any time if you feel it's not the right fit. And here's something special for our listeners. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp is offering our listeners 10% off their first month. What are you waiting for? Talk it out with BetterHelp. Once again, our listeners get 10% off their first month by going to betterhelp.com/thisweek. That's BetterHelp.com/thisweek. Tired of feeling overwhelmed by the headlines? Want to truly understand the why behind the global chaos? Then you are in the right place. Welcome to This Week Explained, your weekly deep dive into the most complex and impactful stories shaping our world. I'm Tiana, and joining me as always is Kervin. Before we jump into the crucial developments of the week, a quick favor. If you want to ensure you never miss an episode, make sure you're following or subscribed on your podcast platform. It literally takes 2 seconds and keeps you instantly updated. And if you are getting value from what we are doing here, a simple rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify helps us reach more curious minds like yours. And don't forget the new interactive comments on Spotify. It's a fantastic way to engage directly with the show and other listeners, extending the conversation beyond the broadcast. You can also find more fantastic podcasts like ours by visiting leonmedianetwork.com, part of the awesome Leon Media Network. This week, we're diving into the latest from Ukraine and Gaza and the threat of ISIS on the African continent. We're going to start, as always, with the latest developments from the war in Ukraine. It has been an incredibly busy couple of weeks, starting with President Trump's summit with Vladimir Putin in Alaska, and now culminating in President Zelensky's trip to Washington with a host of European leaders. You know, his posse. Or as you called them, the Avengers.
Yeah, the Avengers. Oh.
At least he had people backing him up this time.
Oh, I didn't think it was
Urban. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Is the optics of that?
Oh, yeah.
Come on, man. He's like, look, you may not agree with what I want, Trump, but these people all agree with
Did you see
these leaders.
the photo of all of the leaders surrounding Trump?
Yeah, that's literally why you called them the Avengers, right?
Yeah.
Because of that photo?
Yeah.
So where do we begin? Like, what is the main takeaway from all of this frantic activity?
Look, I think the biggest shift that we've seen is that a path to a long-term peace deal, not just a temporary ceasefire, is kind of on the table, depending on who you talk to. Now, for a long time, the focus was just trying to stop the fighting, at least for a little while. Now the conversation has turned to a permanent solution. And the key to that shift came from that Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska 2 weeks ago. According to the U.S. envoy, the Russians did make some concessions as soon as they landed there in Alaska, immediately during that summit.
And what exactly were those concessions?
I think the most significant concession appears to be a willingness to entertain the idea of security guarantees for Ukraine. I say entertain doesn't mean that they agreed to do that, but there is this there's this thought that as the war rages on and it keeps going, that they're going to concede, they're going to capitulate to those security guarantees for Ukraine. It's a crucial point because for so long, Russia has viewed any talk of security for Ukraine as a non-starter in negotiations. Now it seems that they are open to an agreement. It's an agreement that would not involve NATO membership for Ukraine, but it would provide that Article 5 like protection that you and I, Tiana, have been talking about on this podcast for quite a while as one of the things we'd like to see. And this is a major strategic development. It could allow Ukraine to get the security it needs to actually agree to a deal. And they would agree to that deal without crossing one of Russia's biggest red lines, which is NATO membership.
What do you think changed for Russia for them to even entertain this? Because up to this point, they've drawn that hard line and they've stuck to it.
Yeah, I think there's a few things here. One of which I think may surprise people is how forceful President Trump has been in trying to get this deal made. So he's made some remarks towards Russia about some tariffs that may be on the horizon. We don't it's not that we don't like sanctions here. I'm actually working up a post talking about how the sanctions have not really affected Russia. Russia's kind of been able to move past the sanctions by using the global south. So I think that's one part of it. And the other part of all of this is that Putin needs a win right now. If he can get that eastern portion of Ukraine to be Russian territory, to be seen internationally even as Russian territory, that's a huge win for him, and he could take that to the Russian people. I always said that was something that he was looking for since he started this invasion.
So do you think he's in danger of losing the eastern part of Ukraine? Or I just don't quite understand why he'd all of a sudden be willing to give Ukraine security guarantees, especially because, like I said, up to this point, they've been acting like they were winning,
Yeah, that's a great question, Tiana. What I would say here is that Putin may see the writing on the wall that, look, I'm going to have to do something. I'm going to need to, off ramp this special military operation because it is so the sanctions may not be working, but these tariffs that Trump could put on him could definitely harm the Russian economy. That could look bad on him, but it also could be a tactic of what we've seen before from Putin, which is saying he's going to agree to something just to extend these negotiations, make it look like he's the guy that wants peace. You can look to Putin as the one that, he wants you to look at Zelensky as the one who is continuing this war and not himself. And so if he says, oh, well, yeah, I can, I'll allow for those security guarantees, but then some other red lines pop up, he could look like he's the one who's negotiating in good faith and not Zelensky.
So with this new development, President Trump has said he wants the two leaders to meet directly. So what is the status of a potential Putin-Zelensky meeting?
Yeah, I think this is where we see some of the friction. President Trump said that a bilateral meeting between the two leaders is the necessary next step to all of this. He even said he would join during these meetings if it was needed. But the signals from both Kyiv and Moscow have kind of been mixed. Zelensky has said that Ukraine is not afraid of meeting with anyone, but at the same time, he has publicly accused Russia of doing everything it can to actually prevent this meeting. So this is a very different narrative from the one that is coming out of Russia.
Okay, so what is the Russian side of the story?
Well, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that President Putin is ready to meet, but only when the agenda is ready. He went on to accuse Ukraine of saying no to everything. He says Ukraine is showing no flexibility, and this suggests that while a meeting might be the goal, there is still a lot of disagreement on the substance of what would be discussed during this meeting. The fact that Russia has continued to launch heavy attacks on Ukraine throughout this diplomatic push, and Ukraine has struck Russian oil infrastructure, this just shows how fragile the situation is.
I think I saw an article this morning that said that Russia is accusing Ukraine of hitting one of their nuclear sites.
Yeah, there's that. I did see that as well. Also, the fact that the U.S. has denied Ukraine the ability, still denying Ukraine the ability to fire Western-provided weapons deeper into Russia. So we've got some back and forth there, and Ukraine is handcuffed in trying to defend themselves, and Russia is becoming more and more aggressive to try to push this war to an end that they can then come out victorious.
Well, with what Lavrov said about Ukraine saying no to everything and showing no flexibility, I think you are right in that they're trying to make it seem like that it's Ukraine dragging their heels on ending this war.
Yeah.
So on the topic of security guarantees, we saw President Zelensky in Washington this past week with a host of European leaders, his posse, or like you called them, the Avengers. Yeah. So what was the purpose of the trip?
Alec, it was an extraordinary meeting. I think part of it was to not have what happened, I believe, was that in February when they had the blow up in the Oval Office. And that J.D. Vance yelling at Zelensky and all of that. So these European leaders and Zelensky himself were actually concerned that a peace deal brokered by Trump and Putin might force Ukraine into unacceptable territorial concessions. So they rushed out to Washington, D.C., and they wanted to do that to present a united front and to influence President Trump in this decision. The visit was actually a success from their perspective. President Trump appeared more open to the idea of the U.S. providing those security guarantees for Ukraine.
So does that mean U.S. troops on the ground?
No, that is something President Trump has been very clear about. He said that there will be no U.S. boots on the ground, but he did indicate a willingness for the U.S. to provide other forms of support. He said there could be air support, there could be overall coordination of a European-led security effort. So no U.S. boots on the ground, but NATO boots on the ground. And some European countries like France and Britain have said they are ready to contribute ground forces to a coalition to back Ukraine. And that means you did something wrong if France is going to put boots on the ground.
You knew you were going to make a dig.
Yeah.
So we have the Russians making concessions and the U.S. appearing to be willing to join security guarantees for Ukraine. But there are still these two big points of contention, whether a meeting will happen and whether a ceasefire can be achieved.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The diplomacy part has been successful, successfully set a new framework on how these discussions can be had. But the hard part here, the actual negotiation for either a ceasefire or a lasting peace deal, that is still way ahead for us, for the globe, for Ukraine, for Russia. Now, a number of locations for a summit have been floated. Budapest is one of them. Switzerland is another one. Switzerland, right, is a common one that continues to be brought up, but historically is a place where peace deals are signed. But with the ongoing fighting and the differing public statements from both countries, it is clear that a deal is still far from certain. Now, President Zelensky has said that he feels more optimistic now than he did a week or even 2 weeks ago. He said that he saw unity in Washington, D.C., and that the diplomacy was actually much better than it was in previous times. So that's a good thing. But as his European counterparts have said, this is far from over.
I think this is a good stopping point for discussions on the path to peace in the Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, it's a complex situation, and we will be watching it very, very closely. But for now, we need to shift to the war in Gaza. Over the last few weeks, we have seen some very complex and very dangerous dynamics unfold in the Israel-Gaza conflict. And I want to talk about how the conflict on the ground has evolved, particularly the challenges faced by humanitarian groups and the shift in ceasefire talks and the major political moves we have seen this past week. So let's begin with what seems to be a new and deeply troubling tactic. We have now seen several reports over the past few weeks about militants exploiting humanitarian aid efforts. So what can you tell us about what is happening on the ground with organizations like the World Central Kitchen?
Yeah, look, it's incredibly challenging for humanitarian aid organizations, for everyone that's there for the starving people in Gaza. Now, you may recall the tragic incident from April of 2024. That's when an IDF airstrike, or an Israeli Defense Force airstrike, mistakenly targeted a WCK, or World Central Kitchen vehicle, leading to the deaths of 7 aid workers. WCK founder Jose Andres was indeed devastated by that event, as anyone would be, and as we all were. But what we are seeing now is that Hamas fighters have started to pose as WCK aid workers in a clear pattern of deception. Now, Israeli forces did eliminate 5 armed militants who were found in a vehicle marked with the emblem of the World Central Kitchen. The militants were reportedly wearing yellow vests to mimic the aid workers. Now, WCK, or World Central Kitchen, actually confirmed that these individuals were not affiliated with their organization. They've condemned the act, and they've noted that such deception endangers both civilians as well as the aid workers.
So they stole the truck with the WCK emblem on it?
Yes.
Okay. I think I saw an article this morning, or maybe it was yesterday, about how they declared a famine officially in Gaza.
Yes.
And that 500,000 people are in danger of dying because of the lack of food, lack of medical care, all of that.
Yeah, and this doesn't help that situation, right?
No. Right. I mean, this is clearly complicating an already dire situation. We've extensively covered the humanitarian crisis and the severe shortage of aid reaching Gaza. Now, the confirmation that Hamas fighters are deliberately impersonating aid workers introduces a dangerous new variable. It creates an untenable predicament for the military. Because, the IDF must operate with heightened vigilance, yet it is also expected to collaborate with the very same organizations it is now struggling to distinguish from combatants. And the apparent lack of trust not apparent, like very obvious lack of trust between Israel and the UN seems to have been exploited by Hamas. And that is going to further jeopardize both aid efforts and civilian safety. But Israel just blows up everybody.
Yeah, and this is, we talk about, well, they're just blowing up everything and they're hitting civilian targets. And Israel says, well, there were Hamas fighters within those. These reports now confirming, and the intelligence is quite clear on this, that the Hamas is starting to, or has embedded itself into various civilian locations with aid workers and taking aid vehicles and then using them to perform attacks. This is trouble. This is just causing even worse of a situation. And it gives Israel now the ability to say, hey, look, we told you guys that we weren't just blowing things up out of nowhere. We said there were Hamas people there. Now, look, we're showing you, or our reports are now confirming that is true. So that gives them now, if they didn't have it before, carte blanche to do whatever they want.
I don't think
in Gaza.
so, but
okay. Which part? That this gives them carte blanche?
Yeah. Yeah. No.
I'm saying in their mind, if they didn't think so before, they absolutely think so now.
They thought so before. They
What I wanted to say was like, so this tactic that Hamas is using, now that it's public, now that we know that the reporting is true on this one, it fundamentally erodes the security guarantees and the neutrality of humanitarian organizations, which they rely on to operate. I think this is all a calculated move designed to exploit the very friction that you mentioned, that existing tension between military operations and humanitarian imperatives. Now, the deception forces a military to choose between two unacceptable options from a human perspective, right? Risk inadvertently harming genuine aid workers or fail to neutralize a legitimate threat.
Can you pause it? Okay, so obviously ceasefire negotiations have never gone well or led to anything.
That is
So,
absolutely true. Like, oh,
but
man.
it's something we still need to talk about. So, can you tell us what the latest is on the ceasefire negotiations? I mean, from what I saw yesterday, not yesterday, earlier this week, Israel just came out, said they're going to raise Gaza to the ground in order to dismantle Hamas. So where does that leave ceasefire negotiations?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the fact that we're still talking about ceasefire negotiations, right? Since we've been doing this for over a year now, right? They're not going well. We see one side say we're going to agree to something, and then the other side goes, "Oh, well, now we're not going to agree because of the trust issues between the two sides." And just like you said, right? What was one of Israel's terms for a complete ceasefire or a complete ceasefire deal, or to stop the war altogether, was the complete dismantling of Hamas. And so they are saying now, well, we can't agree to a ceasefire because we're going to go dismantle Hamas ourselves, and that's going to be at the detriment of the people of Gaza and Gaza City itself. And look, we have seen a significant shift in Israel's public position. Publicly, they were saying, hey, if we do this phased release of hostages, then we can do ceasefires for 60 days and maybe 90 days and keep it going. That's completely off the table now. And an Israeli official has said that Israel is demanding the release of all 50 hostages. This is despite a recent proposal put forward by Qatar and Egypt that Hamas publicly said that they had accepted. This proposal, that particular proposal, is almost identical to a previous U.S. plan that Israel had already accepted. So it's completely convoluted. Now, we are hearing that Israel is not explicitly rejecting this new proposal, but it said it is not interested in partial deals and that its policy is to secure the release of all the hostages at once.
Okay, so what about Hamas? What is their stance on this new approach?
The new approach, yeah, the new old approach, right?
The new old
of
approach.
agreeing and then disagreeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, they sent a delegation to Cairo for preliminary talks, but the core demands from both sides remain unchanged. There are still those main sticking points. Now, Hamas wants a full Israeli withdrawal and a complete end to the war. In Israel, on the other hand, they demand that Hamas surrender control of Gaza and disarm, or else they'll do it for them. That's what you were talking about, right? And just running roughshod over Gaza City.
Yeah, just raising it to the ground.
Yeah. Now, you've just heard what I said, right, about the two sides, and these are two fundamentally opposing positions, and it's why the Egyptian foreign minister is still trying to push for the original phased deal as a more realistic path forward.
So, on one hand, we have a political push for a total deal, but the reality on the ground and the competing demands of the two sides suggest that a phased approach is likely more pragmatic. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean that's precisely the tension here. Now, the political rhetoric is about a grand, comprehensive solution, but the practical difficulties of achieving that are just enormous. It's a classic problem for negotiators. They have to analyze not only the stated goals of the leaders, but also the underlying capabilities and the non-negotiable demands that prevent a quick resolution.
Well, speaking of tensions, we have also seen a lot of protests in Israel this past week. So, what's happening there? I did see a couple news articles and they had some video attached, and they said it was like hundreds of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. The protests are massive. They've been organized by groups representing the families of the hostages. You said hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets, demanding a deal to free the remaining captives in any way that can be achieved. They're trying to pressure the government. It's the start of a one-day strike. That strike blocked roads. It closed businesses. Police they've had to use water cannons, and dozens of these protesters have been arrested.
So, are they violent protests, or they just don't want protests on the ground?
It's not violent now. I mean, they're upset,
so they're
right?
using water cannons on their own people.
Right. Well, the water cannon blocking roads, right? Closing off businesses. The police have to get them out of the way.
You know, there's strength in numbers, right?
Exactly.
So the more people are out there, you know, the more they can really, you know, let their government know they're not too happy with how they're handling this whole situation.
Absolutely. This is how you get your government leaders to change. This is why in authoritarian governments, they don't allow protest, right? They don't want public protest.
They don't want a bunch of like-minded people pulling their resources together and pushing back against them. So it sounds like frustration is at an all-time high. So what are the competing pressures on Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Yeah, like it is. Frustration with the Israeli people are right now at an all-time high. And Netanyahu is trying to balance this situation because he wants to remain in power, not because he feels for people. This isn't my opinion. It's not because he feels for people or he's like Kim Jong-un crying, saddened by the soldiers who have perished in the war in Ukraine.
Right.
You know, just thought I'd bring that one up.
I can still see the picture of him cradling that soldier to his bosom.
I saw the whole video. It was there's a lot we could talk about in that video. Maybe I should do a video reaction to it, but that's neither here nor there. This is Prime Minister Netanyahu, who just wants to stay in power, much like any leader, right? Once you have power, you don't want to give it up. Absolute power corrupts.
Old white dude. I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean,
I'm just saying for America.
Yeah.
All the old white dudes that are trying to stay in power.
Yeah, you know, being the congressman for 80 years and being rolled up like the Pope, waving at people when you're obviously not in your right mind.
I don't remember if she was a congresswoman or a senator, but she was just like missing for months, and it turns out she was in a
Was that
home.
Dianne Feinstein?
No, it's a different woman.
Okay.
But she was found in a rehab facility with full-blown Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that. But she was.
So you mean the Oval Office?
Nope, surprisingly not. No,
I thought that was no. Neither here nor there. We are going down that rabbit hole. The tangent.
We are off track.
We haven't had a good tangent in quite a few episodes.
I'm trying to, keep it buttoned up and try to focus on.
People want the tangents.
I don't know.
Vote now. Smash the like button if you want with tangents. Yes, I get this is supposed to be a geopolitical news podcast, but it is still a podcast where we're trying to bring levity to some terrible situations. So tangents happen, and they always come back to the topic at hand, which is Netanyahu. So like I said, he's trying to balance the situation to remain in power. On one side, he's got his far-right coalition partners. They do not want a partial deal. They believe that a partial deal is a sign of defeat. They want the war to continue until Hamas is completely dismantled. On the other side, a majority of the Israeli public and the families of the hostages are urging him to accept a deal to bring their loved ones home. The families are accusing him of deliberately setting unworkable conditions to prevent this agreement. Now, the philosophical question here is, who does Netanyahu actually lead? Does he lead the people of Israel, or does he lead that far-right leadership? So who does he actually have to account?
He's already answered this question because he's not listening to the people of Israel.
Right.
He's listening to his far-right leadership coalition. So we know who he answers to. And amidst all of this, the humanitarian situation on the ground continues to be dire. Like I said earlier, I saw an article in which they said 500,000 people are in danger of dying currently, and they declared it a famine. And we saw that there was a new and deeply troubling report this week about Israeli forces and aid seekers. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, look, it's devastating. Just like you said, the UN has warned that starvation levels in Gaza are at their highest since the war began. 500,000 people are on the cusp of starving to death. And aid organizations say the amount of aid getting in is far below what is needed. It is not getting distributed to the people that need it either. And this week, we saw a report that Israeli forces killed at least 17 people who were seeking aid. That included 9 waiting for UN aid trucks. Hospitals and witnesses in Gaza did confirm this. The Israeli Defense Force said they're going to look into the matter, and they will have an answer later on how and why this happened. We won't hold our breath for that one, but they did say they'll look into it. It's just, look, I know it's a war zone. Like getting aid into a war zone is very difficult. But you've got people starving. They need food. They need resources. They need the aid. They should be able to safely get all of that aid. And it just highlights how dangerous the environment is for civilians, the people in Gaza who are just simply trying to survive.
So we are seeing a convergence of factors, like a military operation that is intensifying, the complexities of negotiations that are struggling, and a major political move that is being widely condemned. It seems that these decisions by the Israeli government have created a serious ripple effect, not only in the region, but among its key allies. Next, we are turning our discussions to the continent of Africa, where the removal of Western forces has allowed for the return of ISIS. But first, we are going to take a break, so stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Kervin, we have been talking about a very concerning trend over the past few months. We saw the removal of a lot of Western influence from the African continent, a movement that was championed by a new Global South initiative. But, we assessed that this would create a power vacuum and that extremist groups would use it to their advantage. And, well, now we are seeing the brutal consequences of this.
Yeah, it's very concerning because it doesn't just affect the continent of Africa. It's concerning that it does affect the continent of Africa. But look, this also has a chance to bleed into Europe. What is currently happening in Africa actually confirms what we analyzed for some time now. What we are witnessing is a clear resurgence of ISIS on the African continent. It is a move that is both strategic but also brutal, as ISIS tends to be. It's not like one-off attacks like you would see with Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram. There's a concerted campaign to establish a new base of operations and to carry out a specific ideological agenda.
Well, where's China and Russia? How come they aren't doing anything about it?
They're
It'll
on the
affect them eventually too.
they are on the continent.
I know that. That's what I'm saying. Why aren't they doing anything? Since that was the whole point. They're like, we'll come in, we'll take the place of all the Western countries that were here. We're better. We have more money. We'll be able to protect you more. Like, where are they? Why aren't they doing anything?
One of the other things we predicted, right, is that Russia and China would do nothing because this affects the West, right? Europe, the United States. It typically doesn't affect them. Sometimes it'll affect Russia, right? We saw the terrorist attack that happened last year, I believe, around this time last year, I think it was. But China's kind of closed off to this, so they don't care. They're going to keep trying to increase their power.
All the resources.
Yes, exactly. Increase their power in the region to strip the resources from the continent. Exactly.
Okay, so they aren't exactly hiding their intentions, are they? I'm not talking about Russia and China right now. I'm back to talking about ISIS and Boko Haram and everything. It seems to be an agenda they're broadcasting for the entire world to see. I mean, we've seen so much of this come out in the last few weeks, especially with some of their recent newsletters. So what are we to make of that?
Yeah, like that's absolutely a key piece of this whole puzzle, Tiana. It shows us exactly what they want the world to see. I keep a close eye on all the weekly newsletters from all the various organizations to kind of piece together the intel from that you can gather. This one, Al-Naba, that's basically ISIS megaphone, and they are using it to send a very clear message that their leadership is alive and well.
And that runs counter to those rumors we heard that their spokesman had been killed in Syria, doesn't it?
Yeah, so what you're alluding to there is after the U.S.-led raid in Syria, there's a lot of talk about whether their spokesperson had been eliminated. But in a recent issue of the newsletter, they featured a message from him that was very specific and also very recent. This is an indicator that he is still alive and active. It doesn't prove it, but it is one of those indicators that we look for. Now, whether he is alive or not, this is still a way for ISIS to show that they are far from being a leaderless organization and that their communication channels are still very robust. Now, it's a very deliberate and tactical use of information warfare.
So they are using this platform to show strength and to reassure their followers. So what else did the newsletter reveal about their strategy?
Yeah, it was absolutely a window into their strategic focus. It essentially credited the experience gained by ISIS operatives in Iraq and Syria for their increasing success in Africa. This suggests that they are not just local groups acting on their own. There is a transfer of knowledge, tactics, and possibly even foreign fighters. This is a pseudo-military taking lessons learned from other conflicts and using that on another battlefield. The group is now openly praising what it calls its jihad against Christians in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Mozambique. And it is using this as a model for other countries.
You know, it's one thing to talk about strategic maps and political vacuums, but then you see the images and read the firsthand accounts. It really brings it all into a sharp, brutal focus. We're seeing these incredibly violent reports, particularly targeting Christian communities. From a practical, boots-on-the-ground perspective, what is really happening here? Like, what does all of this information tell you?
Yeah, like first, the reports are deeply disturbing. ISIS continues to be much more brutal than the other terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. They're much more brutal than the Taliban, than even Boko Haram. And they are more in line with how the cartels deal with their adversaries. We've seen credible evidence of ISIS-aligned soldiers beheading Christians, burning churches, destroying entire villages. In Mozambique, the Islamic State Mozambique province, and in the DRC, the Islamic State Central Africa province, have been releasing photographs of these attacks, openly boasting about them. It is a clear and direct target of religious minorities.
So this is not just about gaining territory, it's about an ideological war.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you said that. Because when we think of war, right, it's about territory or it's about protecting someone else's territory from being invaded, but not for ISIS, right? This is an ideological war. The territory comes secondary to that ideological war, and that is ISIS in a nutshell. Ideology is at the core of their actions. The recent newsletter we talked about laid out a chilling ultimatum for Christians, said to convert to Islam, pay a specific tax, or face murder and displacement. This is their stated goal. It's their stated goal for everyone, and it is what we're seeing unfold in real time. This is a genocidal ideology and is a significant part of their campaign.
And what about the wider world's response? Are we seeing the international community acknowledge the religious component of these attacks, or is the focus elsewhere?
Yeah, look, as I believe the focus is not always where it should be globally. So the United Nations and other organizations have reported on the mass displacement of people, with tens of thousands forced to flee their homes, but they are often hesitant to specifically mention the religiously motivated nature of the violence of ISIS. The UN continues to fail in calling out terror organizations like Hamas, like ISIS. It's not a new trend. This is and has been a very big concern. We've talked about it on this podcast. You can call both sides out when they're doing something wrong. What I can say is that the reluctance to call out this anti-Christian animus of ISIS is a point of concern because it can be interpreted as a global peace institution like the UN, cozying up to multiple terror groups for reasons that I guess only the UN knows right now.
This takes me back to our previous conversations. We've talked about how a lot of Western influence has been either withdrawn or asked to leave the continent. Is this what it looks like in practice? Is this a result of that power vacuum that we predicted?
Yeah, it's a great point, and it is a direct consequence of the power vacuum that we discussed. So with Western influence diminished, these extremist organizations are finding it easier to operate in ungoverned spaces. We're seeing a regrouping and an expansion. Look, we saw a defeated ISIS in the Middle East, but the ideology and the network, that did not disappear. Instead, it has found fertile ground in Africa, where it is now growing stronger and unfortunately more violent. This is a direct consequence of this new global South dynamic on the continent.
Okay, you said earlier that the threats are not just contained to Africa. This ISIS newsletter also made some very direct threats towards Europe. Is that correct?
Yeah, look, that's why we really condemned what the Biden administration allowed to happen on the continent. We fairly accurately predicted that this is what was going to happen, and then the target would be Europe. And once these fighters enter Europe, it becomes much easier to get into the rest of the Western-aligned nations. We aren't just pulling this out of context. In a very explicit call to action, this newsletter encouraged its followers in Africa to carry their jihad to the shores of Europe. It explicitly prayed for the success of these attacks and for European cities to become like the war-torn provinces of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Mozambique. This is not just a subtle warning, it is a clear statement of intent. The threat is global, and that threat is rooted in the same ideology that is causing so much suffering in Africa.
Thank you, Kervin, for breaking that down for us. We will continue to monitor this closely. Is there anything else you want to discuss?
I think that's it on my side. Do you have anything you want to discuss?
You need to tell the listeners thank you for putting up with our inconsistent schedules lately.
Oh, yes. Yes, we we apologize for that. I know we didn't put out an episode last week. It has been...
This month as a whole has been...
very inconsistent.
Yeah, and it's probably... There's going to be a couple more times closing out the summer where we might not be able to churn out an episode, but we are trying to get back. It's just hard right now.
Yeah, it's kind of like when we first started, right? That's what it feels like.
What do you mean? I don't remember us being inconsistent with posting episodes. I thought we went full tilt and just...
So there was a time there we we'll like do every other week because we just trying to get into the groove.
No, I don't think so. I think from what I remember, we both remember it differently, I guess, because I remember putting out an episode and dreading it at that point because I hated the sound of my own voice. I was like, it's Thursday again. I have to record. Ugh.
Yeah. Remember Thursdays? That was great.
Yeah, I remember the good old days.
Yeah.
The good old days. So, I mean, anything else?
Well, just to reiterate what you said, the next couple months, it's going to be, there'll be some inconsistencies. Yeah, because when you get out here, I'm not recording. Sorry.
I'm not sorry.
I know you want to, but
that's fine.
So yeah, we really want to say thank you for continuing to listen and sticking by us and with us. Yeah, thank you. Even though we haven't stuck to a consistent schedule lately. We will be more consistent after the next few months. And, the world's going to be consistent in having things to talk about. So, you got us for that. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope you found it both informative and engaging. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we would love to hear from you. For more in-depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, thank you so much. And until hopefully next week, stay safe out there.